Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Stronger You Project, episode number 6. And I am here with a good friend of mine. His name is Guy Felicella, and I was very fortunate to meet him when I stayed at the Ronald McDonald House. Yeah, Guy has a big heart in the right place. Now, Guy is an international speaker and drug policy reform advocate from Vancouver. He started coping with trauma, undiagnosed learning disability, and emotional pain with drugs and alcohol at 12 years old, which escalated into substance use disorder and left him residing in the downtown East Side for 20 years. Guy faced additional traumas through life of homelessness, institutions, gangs, severe health conditions that nearly took his leg, and multiple overdoses. Today, Guy has over 10 years of recovery and uses his career and platform to advocate for trauma therapy, harm reduction, quicker access to treatment, and change drug policy. Guy's an inspiration to many and a fierce advocate for those needing a voice. Guy Felicella, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Hey, Justin, thanks for having me.
Now, man, that's a lot. For one, I want to say congratulations on 10 years. That's double digit sobriety.
Thanks.
That's a huge milestone. I'm coming up to half that. I'm coming up to my 5 year.
Big
But
deal.
yeah, you know what? I never really celebrated my first year. I didn't celebrate my sobriety birthday because I was pretty hard on myself. Like, good job, man. You quit using a substance. Congratulations. And I started to realize that, hey, you know what? It was kind of a big deal. It had a grip on me for 16 years, and I'm happy to get out of it. But today, I want a couple of things. I want to speak about a couple of things with you. I want to speak about your journey, of course. But I also want to speak on, harm reduction because I don't think a lot of people are educated enough in that area. I know there's a lot of pushback against it from communities. So I definitely want to get into that. But I want to hear your story. I want to hear, how did you get to living on East Hastings, where I actually lived in Vancouver when I was 24 years old. So I know East Hastings. I know what it's like. I've been down there. um, so if you could just tell us, like, how did you get there, but also kind of what it's like down there, the atmosphere, and kind of your life experiences.
Yeah, well, I struggled. I had a I had a challenging childhood. I had my parents were physically present, but emotionally, distant. There was alcoholism, and there was domestic abuse, verbal abuse, which developed my, early on anxiety and depression, and so in that environment, and finding out later on in life you have undiagnosed learning disabilities, and I always looked for ways as a kid. I never felt inside that I was a good person. And it's probably, I attribute a lot of it to the verbal abuse is very crippling, and especially in a young person's life or in anybody's life, but it starts to develop a negative voice inside your head that tells you these things, or you start to believe these things because people keep continuing to say these things. And whether it's at home or at school or from other people, when you continuously hear this, you kind of form a negative image of yourself. And I was always asked, like, what's wrong with you? Why can't you learn like everybody else? Why would you do that? And it's like, you struggle internally with these feelings. And so I eventually, it got to the point where I was thinking of ending my life as a young kid, and I realized that things weren't going to change, or change quick enough. um and so maybe I had to do it on my own or figure it out. And so I thought my answer as a young kid was running away from home. And yeah, I mean, you run away from home as a 12-year-old kid, police bring you back home, and then, you get beaten up for running away, and then you run away again, and you keep running and running and running. And then eventually for me, like, it got to the point where how I felt about myself was, just a really dark place. And, I often say this, is that the I found street drugs at 12, and when I found those drugs, it was magical in the sense that, it took those feelings away. And so not being able to understand how to cope or learn how to cope or being taught how to cope as a young kid, and then always things turning into the negative against you. When I did those drugs, those were the drugs that actually saved my life. But what you don't realize at that young age is what you're unleashing, or possibly could be unleashing in your life. of why you use those substances. For me, those same drugs were eventually going to turn into ones trying to end my life. And then I quickly got involved with gangs, and when I got involved with gangs as a very young kid, they, people will say, they were grooming you to do stuff for them, and sure they were, but this was this is not. I didn't care. What I cared about was that they loved me. And if you don't get love from one place, you'll look for it until or you'll be on a search for it until you find it. And so I thought I found it there. And and then quickly, I don't understand the consequences with gang squad, task force, strike force unleashed into your life because you're an associate with a bunch of gangs. And quickly, I become incarcerated at 14 years old, and then I was made a ward of the court, which was another debacle. I felt that the foster care system let me down by bouncing me around from place to place. And so eventually I just started running away from everyone, everything, including myself. And I started going into the downtown east side of Vancouver at a very young age. Um, I had moments of like good clarity in some group homes where, I was doing better than others. But I mean, eventually I just found out once you start being passed around to home, and you realize that you're just the same unpredictable nature that you had as a child, growing up in your own family life. And it brought me into a community of the downtown east side where I had drugs, I had easy access to drugs, and eventually, that told the drugs just got so rapid and quicker in my life. And I was never a drug user who was social. I'm not a social drug user. I'm a get wasted drug user. And
Yeah.
I didn't understand that in the beginning. I never had an off button. And I realized later on is why I didn't have the off button is because I was trying to numb myself from all the other stuff that I didn't want to think about. And when I got into the downtown east side, I mean, boy, oh boy, man, my the community itself is beautiful, because I remember when I got down there that I could see that it was comforting in knowing that other people were struggling the same way that I was, or with different circumstances. So that's comforting to know that you don't feel alone in your struggles. And the community always looked out for me. I was a young kid. I learned the street life pretty quick. I adapted. I understood things. And maybe, in a sense, it was something that I was good at surviving my childhood. And if I didn't go through the stuff that I went through as a kid, I probably would have never made it out of the downtown east side, because I understood how to navigate certain challenging circumstances, or try to fly under the radar, or just mind your own business on things. And, eventually getting into that community, and selling drugs and using drugs, it just got so worse so fast that, when I look back, I survived the HIV/AIDS crisis in the downtown east side, where 1 in 4 people had contracted HIV in that community. I also survived the overdose crisis in '98. I survived, decades of being homeless in the downtown east side. I survived, decades of being in and out of the prison criminal justice system. I survived 5 osteomyelitis bone infections, 4 in my left leg, 1 in my back, where I had to relearn how to walk again. And then I survived, 6 overdoses. And really, for me, surviving all of that, and through it all, it's interesting when I look back on the journey. It was really like a harm reduction paradigm that kept me alive through all of that. And back then, too, harm reduction was looked upon similar to what it could be in some communities today, I believe, is that if you supported people who were harm reduction, you were either enabling them to be in their addiction, or you were a criminal because you were doing things that weren't necessarily, you know, legal, but however, it's to counteract a health condition. And when you have laws and policies in place that are actually, hurting people, not helping people, I mean, obviously, you have to say to yourself that either these laws need to be changed to support people, or people will develop a harm reduction approach to things. And harm reduction is really that health issue of looking at a person. I mean, I was using drugs regardless of harm reduction or not. That wasn't going to stop. It was the underlying issues. But people like to think that that enabled me to continue being down there. No, what enabled me to be continue being down there is that um, I had gotten to a point where in my own life I felt more comfortable there than I did in any other community because of how people looked at me. And so
You
you
know,
become trapped.
yeah. I just want to stop you there for a second because I remember going to rehab, and that was the most normal I ever felt. I remember leaving my friends, my family. Yeah, was I sad? Yeah, but when I got to rehab, man, I was like, I felt good. I felt normal. I felt that comfort knowing that, hey, you're just as messed up as I am. And you know what? You're being here, you're being vulnerable, and seeing grown men cry in front of, I was in Maple Ridge Treatment Center with 60 other men, and then Kelowna with another 20. And but that gave me comfort to know that, they struggled just as much as I did, right? And that I was the black sheep. And I'm very fortunate that I never ended up on the downtown east side, because there was a part of me that I almost moved there. That was like, and it wasn't because I wanted that lifestyle, is because it might sound weird to somebody, but I wanted to fit in. And
Yeah.
so and it's weird because I had parents that loved me. Talking to a counselor later, he's like, you didn't get the love and connection you needed. Not that your parents failed you, but you didn't get the love and connection you needed, and I got that through drugs. And I was thinking maybe get that through there. Now, you said that maybe your childhood prepared you for that downtown east side experience. So was your parents like emotionally and physically abusive, and that's what helped you to learn how to live in survival mode, kind of thing?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there was abusive moments throughout my childhood. I always describe it as cloudy with a chance of thunder and lightning.
Oh, okay.
That's how I grew up. It was very it was a struggle. It was either good or it was bad. It was just unpredictable. You know, you're always trying to figure I was always trying to figure out, is it safe or is it unsafe? What do I do? Do I kind of fly on the radar, or am I okay to be present, right? And I'd started acting out as well because I wasn't getting the love and attention at home as well. But also too, my undiagnosed ADHD, which I found out later on in life, which was a
Hmm.
dopamine deficiency, meaning I did things because um, I lacked feeling, substance. So I would do things to act out to get the rush. So I was seeking something very, very early. And when you're undiagnosed for decades, I remember when I was diagnosed at 38, I started to cry because I'd always felt stupid my whole life. Like when somebody diagnosed me with something, I was like, it all made sense because in school I was like, why can't you learn like everybody else? And my best response was, I don't really know how to do this. And I needed people to show me, not to give me a piece of paper and tell me what to do, because I couldn't process that. And once that diagnosis started to happen. And then, my last overdose, I think, was probably the most um, heightened moment of my life, where February 18th, 2013, at Insight. I wake up on the floor and I see the nurse is emotional, and I ask her, what the heck, why are you so emotional? And she says, because I care. And I just burst into tears. Yeah, like I just lost it. And I said right then and there, and I've said it many times, I just said, I don't want to do this anymore. And I didn't know how I was going to do it, but at that moment, that particular moment, like, I was really good at getting sober. I was never good at staying sober.
Mm, mm.
But there's a big difference with that. And so it's like how to manage emotions to stay sober. And after that moment, I knew I was either going to die in my addiction or I was going to die trying to get out. And I just, you know what, I left the downtown east side of Vancouver with one set of clothes on my back and a welfare check. That's it. I mean, decimated with nothing. And I just went to a recovery house that I knew of in Surrey, and I went to an outpatient program. And I just said that I'm just gonna make a promise and a commitment to myself, not to anybody else. I didn't have anybody anyway in the beginning, you know what
Mhm.
I mean? But it was really just a commitment to myself that I just wanted to do better and be better. And I was sick and tired of pretending to be somebody that I wasn't. Because it was really that was really keeping me trapped as well. And here we are today, over a decade later in a good life. So it worked. It worked out.
Yeah, and you know what? I love seeing the pictures of you and your kids, and that's it's pretty cool to see because if it wasn't, if it may not be for the clean supply and harm reduction, would you think you would be here?
Oh, I mean, most definitely. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it that I wouldn't be alive if it wasn't for harm reduction. My kids wouldn't be alive. Like I wouldn't have over a decade sober. It's just not even a debatable conversation. It's like fact based evidence that
Mhm.
and I describe my story. It had a little bit of luck. It had a lot of perseverance and a ton of grace. Um, and the if harm reduction didn't exist, that this wouldn't be possible. And so when we look at it, or how people view it, is they often view it as enabling somebody to continue using drugs. Well, like, I mean, I could say that, how many times I went to treatment, or people blame harm reduction for sabotaging people's recovery. And I'm like, well, how does that sabotage anybody's recovery? Because I could be in treatment and be triggered in treatment, and that could sabotage my recovery. I can't blame other circumstances for my own recovery. I have to take responsibility. And a lot of the times where people do relapse or use again, it's not that you failed. You probably learned valuable lessons through that. Big deal. You made a mistake. That one that you felt that you made a mistake. It's not the end of the world. Celebrate trying and get back up and keep going. And I mean, I don't know how many times I've relapsed. I don't know how many. I mean, I've gone to treatment over 12 times. I don't know how many recovery houses I've been in after that as well. I don't know
Mhm.
how many times I've been into detox. But I can tell you it's just been astronomical that every time I went in, people used to even say to me on the street, it's like, why do you keep going in there and doing that when you just come out and use again? I'm just like, well, I just keep trying. And
Mhm.
I think we don't celebrate that enough because there's a lot of people on the street right now trying. And what harm reduction did for me, it wasn't recovery institutions coming to the downtown east side to get me out. It was harm reduction folks telling me that there's an option outside. We can get you into this place, or if you want to go to treatment, we'll help you. We'll give you a bus ticket. I mean, they gave me bus tickets to Kelowna.
Mhm.
Like, I mean, this is the thing is people create this myth in their head or this false narrative that harm reduction just keeps people trapped. Well, no, that's not it. What harm reduction does is give people the ability to build a connection to access other services. And that's often what gets missed in the translation.
Yeah, so you have to go and pick it up from a distribution center with professionals, right?
Yeah, like if you go to Insight, the supervised consumption site,
Yeah.
and when I had overdosed on the floor that day, the nurse said to me, "Why don't you go up to the detox on the second floor and just take a break?" And I told her I need to go. Never mind, I needed to go. There's a big difference between needing and wanting. I wanted to go.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I needed to go for years, and oftentimes I did. It didn't. It just oftentimes it just doesn't work out for all of us, right? And so for me, in going and being, harm reduction developed a relationship. The people of harm reduction developed a relationship with me that gave me the ability to have confidence in accessing other services because I could access services, but they truly helped me getting into detox, getting on income assistance, getting me into treatment. And even though I'd leave treatment and come back downtown, you have to have a harm reduction safety net because the reality is that most people who do go into recovery and treatment, and I mean the majority, I don't know, it's probably high 98, 99% that will use again.
Mhm.
Like, and so here you look at, so we're sending people to treatment or telling people to go to treatment, but we're not having that harm reduction safety net underneath it, just in case somebody leaves treatment to go use again. So what are we doing? Are we just going to revolve them through treatment multiple times and then they're going to go back, use again, and die? We have to really think of a full spectrum of care that meets the needs of people to get it timely access to treatment and recovery. But also, if they leave treatment, to know like, hey, man, it's okay. It didn't work this time. That's cool. We want you to come back. So use this harm reduction service. Make sure you don't use alone. Take care of yourself. We love you. We're here for you. Give us a call. That kind of stuff. That what we do is we sometimes often is shame people. I already felt enough shame in my life when I relapsed.
Mhm.
I didn't need to hear it from everybody else.
Yeah, no, that's true. It's I knew every time, that I actually say about it in my speech is every time I picked up that drink, I picked up that drug, I knew I was not only hurting myself, but I was hurting time at work, I was hurting time with my son, and I was hurting my family. But I kept going back because it was the connection and love that it gave me, and it's something I thought I needed, and I couldn't quit until I wanted to, until I absolutely wanted to. You can always, and that's where it took me a while to distinguish the difference between needs and wants. You can always say, "Yeah, I need this. I need this." Yeah, but do you want it? Like, and when
Yeah,
you finally want it, that's when you can actually start to make the change. And it's having that safety net when you get out. You have to have a plan because I knew when I came out of rehab for the second time, was 3 months sober. I hit that pink cloud 3 months after. I stopped doing my coping mechanism, stopped taking my medication, stopped going to my counseling. Boom, right down that rabbit hole again.
yeah.
And
And two, we become familiar because it's worked for so long in our lives. It's almost like the sickness is comforting in a familiar way because we understand it. It's like, oh, hey, I know how to change these circumstances. Even though I know it, I've never gone into it actually used again and said, well, this is going to go okay. Like, just never once did I ever say that to myself. At least I had that. I wasn't going to deny it. I knew what was going to happen. I was gonna go all back in. And then the challenge with that is that until you learn, you honestly, and I mean, I had to change everything. I thought, go in, change one thing, get off the drugs. No way, man. That's absolutely. And I think my biggest accomplishments aren't really that I'm over a decade sober. It's that I've created a new life that keeps me from going back to using again,
yeah,
or also the coping mechanisms that I understand and regulating my emotions and knowing that, what, like throughout the day, I'm probably going to be angry like 5 times today. I'll probably feel sad some point today, and I'll probably feel really good and happy later on. So you ride these waves of emotions. The thing is that unless you have a better alternative to what you've done to cope for so many years, and this
mhm,
people think you go into recovery for 3 months and these coping mechanisms just reappear or come back or you learn them. No way. Like it takes, I'm still learning,
oh yeah,
like this is the reality and it's over 10 years. We can't expect people, to go into treatment and then just never use drugs again. That's just not reality. So my scary part of it is that I've watched people die in recovery centers, second stage housing, relapse from recovery and die. And my thing of why I support harm reduction and the full spectrum of care is because, look, man, I don't want people to die, and I value people and humanity as what, like people are going to use drugs. Nobody should just die instantly from them.
mhm. Yeah, and you know what? I have my best friend, um, had everything going for him, man. He was drafted into the NHL. Like found drugs, and unfortunately, he just didn't wake up one day. My cousin was in a rehab center for over a year, got out, used, and then he passed away. Now it's am I mad at them both? Was I mad? Yeah, I was mad at them both in the beginning, and then I realized it's like, man, Dustin, you did the same thing. I'm fortunate. I'm lucky that I didn't get a bad bag. Like
Yeah,
the only difference between my life and so many other people that overdose is one bag, one tainted bag, and I am very fortunate because it like I did a speaking event with a counselor, and she said it's the average of 17 times for people to go through treatment or something before they can finally give it up. And you send a loved one to rehab, and you send them, let's say, for a month, and you expect them to come out and be perfectly fine, is that's a pretty high expectation. I went to rehab twice, and I relapsed both times, and it wasn't until I wanted to, commit suicide, that I finally made the change. Um, because I was scared my son was going to grow up without his dad. But it takes a lot. It takes hitting rock bottom. It takes having that person, having a son. For me, it took having a son, and then picturing him without a dad. For you, it took that one person saying, "I care," and seeing that person's face. And I was my buddy sent me a clip from Joe Rogan yesterday, and I can't remember how exactly it went, but he's like, "You get all these people walking by, homelessness, people in poverty, and they just walk by now." And he's like, "That's the one thing that's scaring me in this world." And it's like, just nobody cares. It's like nobody cares to say hi. Nobody cares to talk to them. Nobody cares to stop by and see how they're doing. Right now, you look on social media, it's people just film them. It's like, this is what our city's come to. Yeah, that maybe okay. Yeah, they're living on the street, but why do you need to film it? Why do you need to put them on your TikTok? Or
Yeah.
it's it took
It's
so much.
a it's a it's a sad it's sad in the sense that we posted for likes or whatever, you know, somebody at their worst moments of their lives, you know. And then I always say too is that, we're not helping people, you know, by doing that at all, right? We all know that there's immense challenges in our world today with, addiction, mental health, but we have to remember what's killing people as well. It's the toxic drug supply. The drugs today, 6 people will die today in the province of British Columbia. I think people only reflect on that once a month when the coroner service comes out and then go back, well, let's go see a movie on Friday night. We've become numb to the fact that the amount of loss of life and how that impacts one life lost. Do you know how many people that impacts? Their family, their communities, their friends.
It's the iceberg
Their name.
effect.
It is unbelievable. And so what we've had, over the last 7 years is just an astronomical amount of lives lost, but also the grief and for the responders who are responding to all this. I mean, we have just put ourselves in a position where people are struggling, burning out. And it's one of those things where I look at in my own life. I go to trauma therapy. I take care of myself. I eat well. I, try to do the best to, of repairing a past by making healthier choices. And that's how I cope today. But my biggest impact is trauma therapy, which is something I wouldn't be able to access if I didn't have a job and benefits. And so
Mhm.
there's a lot of people in our world that struggle and don't have access to trauma therapy that need it. And so one of the things that I advocate for is that that should be covered under healthcare that people could access.
Now, what's the difference between trauma therapy and counseling?
Well, trauma therapy is counseling is it depends what you're going to get counsel for, but trauma therapy is about specific working with specifics with trauma moments. Like I do a lot of EMDR, which
Yeah.
is rapid eye processing, or you can use sensors in your hand, where it's a vibration process. It's strange. I mean, it was weird when my therapist suggested it, but it focuses on the trauma, and it's today too. It's not you're not dealing with your trauma of the past, you're dealing with the reaction from it. When
Mhm.
when this is the interesting thing. And one of the things I even discovered about myself is that I'm very controlling in my environment. I like things controlled, right? Things that I can manage and
Yeah.
control. Like, so for me, I like things put specifically in areas. And but it's funny because you know sometimes if things are out, I notice things are out of place. But my therapist was telling me, she goes, well, of course you would have control because you never had it for so long.
Fair.
So it's very empowering to have a sense of control again. Like, because I was so out of control for so long. So really kind of opened me up to being like, is it really that necessary that I needed a specific exact way? No. So, but it's things that you learn as you go through the journey. But it was interesting when she told me about the control aspect because I was like, oh yeah, I had no control over not even myself. It was like,
That's
you know,
fair, and it's true, right? So do you now kinda put your guard down when something's not in a certain spot, or do you still like it in a certain spot?
yeah. I mean, I've
Prefer
let
it.
there's some things I'm a work in progress, my friend. So there's some things that
Yeah,
even yeah, there's some things that are a little bit harder for me, and you know what? There's a compromise too. So even on
fair.
with my family understands as well. So they're and to me, I've learned to let a lot of things go because I think it's important to I think my greatest accomplishment is being a dad.
Mhm.
You know, that's and trying to raise 3 kids to grow up in a kind, caring world that has some empathy and compassion and understanding for people, right? I think a
Yeah.
lot of the times when we look at people who struggle with mental health and addictions is we just see the person doing the substance, and that angers us. We don't
Mhm.
understand the story of what's behind the person, whether it's residential school survivor, intergenerational trauma, verbal abuse, physical abuse. We don't even know nothing about them, but yet we judge them for that moment.
Exactly, I went to rehab with some guys that, I'm not gonna tell their stories, but, I was just eye-opening, and then I started to feel guilty too. I'm like, "Well, I didn't have that, so why am I like this?" Right? But then I did a podcast with a kid the other day, 23, Tanner, and he's like, his trauma was getting moved around from hockey teams, and that was big to him, right? And he actually opened up my eyes. He's like, my trauma is not the same as anybody else's, but my trauma is my trauma. And in rehab, I felt bad for using. I always felt bad. I'm like, hey, Justin, you're a smart kid. You're athletic. You got things going for you. But I wasn't diagnosed with ADHD till 30, with major depression till 30 or 28, and anxiety till 28. I didn't know I had all those things, and I was wondering why I was always a hyper kid. But I got good grades. But I was super hyper, trying to act out, trying to be the funny man. But my trauma was different than a lot of other people's trauma. And we got to remember, when you look at that person, I learned this in coaching, and it says all behavior makes perfect sense. So
Right.
it's hard to not take things personally. I could still have a hard time with that. But there's a reason why that person's acting like it. Now, I'm not giving them, an excuse to treat you poorly, but someone could have lost a friend, a family member, a loved one, lost a job, got diagnosed with mental illness, forgot to take the medication. But there's a reason why that person's acting like that. So maybe next time you see someone who's using, instead of saying why are they like that, just or not why are they like that, but why can't they stop? It's like, why are they doing it? Right? Like, have you ever had a I know for my wife, it was very hard for her to she's like, why can't he just stop for us? Does he not love us? And I think a good question to ask besides that is like, why doesn't he love himself enough to stop?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I didn't have I didn't have any partner in my picture when I I really didn't, I'd gotten into a place just immense loneliness and pain. And
Mhm.
I mean, luckily for me, Gabor Mate was my doctor, but he mentioned something that really kind of opened me up. And he got in. He managed to break me down a bit. Where he just said, "Guy, I don't think drugs are your problem." And I was like, "What are you talking? Everybody said drugs are my problem." And he says, "Well, I just think there's a reason why you use them the way you do."
Yeah.
And once he said, "Tell me about your childhood," I just burst into tears. I didn't even I mean, I was so and even we did a segment together, me and him, and I mentioned that to him, and he said, "It's not shocking what I," because I was shocked that he said it. He said, "It's not shocking what I said. It's shocking that no addiction specialist or psychiatrist or counselor ever said that to you before.
Mhm.
Everybody keeps focusing on the drugs. We don't focus solely on the underlying issues of why the person's using those drugs. And until you
Yes.
get to the why behind it,
Yeah.
and guess what? There's people out there that can use drugs socially and casually and
Mhm.
intermittently and have great jobs and do their thing. The sad part with that too is that they die too because of the toxic drug supply. They're not even having addiction. And then we have also discovering. So for me, the big thing in my life was discovering the negative impact of how I viewed myself as a person. That will
Mhm.
cripple anybody. Your voice, that voice, I needed the volume to shut up in my head. So drugs turned that down for a long time. And, one of the things I learned in trauma therapy is that, and this can go blanketed to everybody, you are not responsible for the trauma that you've endured, whether that's as a child or for whatever. You're not responsible that you had to endure that. However, we are responsible in making sure we don't pass that on.
Mhm.
But we're also, the one thing where I add to that is that the government is also responsible in understanding that to create open pathways so that people can access therapy. And when it comes to trauma therapy, that is $100 a session for 1 hour. And if you don't have 100, I mean, in today's day and age with unaffordability and the economy, housing crisis, overdose, addiction, mental health, I mean, people have to make a choice like, do I go to trauma therapy or do I feed my kids?
Yeah.
That should never happen.
Well, it's happening in a lot of things, right? It's kids can't play sports these days. Like my son plays hockey. Man, is that expensive. But it's to be able to not be able to afford counseling. Like I've been fortunate enough to be in a job where I've had benefits. So I've been able to access counseling. When I worked at the mill, they paid the mill paid for 5 sessions for me. And then my benefits kick in, right? And then they pay up to 500 or something, which is it's not that many if you think about it, right? Depending on how long you want to go for. And my counselor was $200 an hour,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
He helped though.
yeah, I think when you go, I think for people, like for me, I found the right therapist, and I've been going to her for years now.
Mhm.
And I mean, and the funny thing is that she made me feel so comfortable when I came there. Because when I saw her, she's like half my age, and she says, "How do you feel?" And I said, "Well, I feel like I'm embarrassed that I'm going to sit here and you know probably not open up to somebody that's half my age that's going to, and you know what her exact words was like, yeah, well, everybody thinks like that. And I was like, oh, and she goes, yeah, and I'd be, why, I wouldn't expect you to not feel embarrassed. And she just put a layer of me feeling a lot more comfortable.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it took, and I mean, I don't know, with her, it was just different. I had a session where I just broke down, and it was after like the third session. And I don't know how it happened. I just started crying. It was just like, holy shit, I can't believe this is happening. And ever since then, it's been, spectacular. The ability to have an outlet to listen to somebody else's perspective. And she's not in addictions. She doesn't care about drugs or any of that stuff. She
Mhm.
focuses on the trauma issues. So that's
Well,
the reason why I was using. And so once I put those pieces together and got the support and help figured that out, it became easier to treat my addiction. And it continues to be a lot easier to get through. And I do one a month now. But I when you think about one a month, it's $1,300 a year for me, but I'm on a sliding scale because I actually told her that I couldn't afford her anymore. And then she said, we'll put you on a sliding scale so you can come because
yeah, my counselor did that too for me. And it just ask, right? And that's a good thing about counseling is that people can put it, oh, I don't need a counselor. I know people that go to couples counseling just to go. They just
yeah,
go. They don't have major problems in their marriage. They go because that's a mediator. Now,
yeah,
if you go to a counselor one on one, that's a mediator of you and your thoughts. Because, like you said, your thoughts are can be your own worst enemy. Up to, I think it's 80% of your thoughts can be negative and repetitive. Now,
yeah,
if you're constantly berating yourself, bullying yourself, beating yourself down, who's going to be that mediator? Is it going to be you with the coping mechanisms that you haven't established yet? Are you going to be fair to yourself? Are you going to take your thought compared against this one bad thing you did, and then you're going to believe that thought? So, a counselor, helped me through acceptance and forgiveness of myself, and that was one of the biggest things. And I've realized that I got to continue to work on that acceptance piece because I can still go down that. Hey, I can walk around town or being an experience and be like, it will trigger me back to something I did, or being up for 3 days, right? And it's something that's, it's I have to go back and make sure that you continue to do the work. Because if you don't continue to do the work, then you're playing with a slippery slope there. But it's always good to get that other perspective because, for one, you're not always right.
Yeah, I
as
still
much
don't
as
listen to my own head all the time either.
yeah, as much as we want to think so, we are not always right. Um,
Yeah.
but I like what you said. I was surprised to hear you say that the counselors never focused on the why; they focused on the drug. Because when I went to rehab, they worried about the why, like the why and the how. Right? They didn't care about the substance. It's like, it doesn't matter what substance it is. It could be shopping, it could be gambling. It's whatever fires that dopamine hit is that you're missing from something
Yeah,
is the
that's
why.
what I did say that. They didn't care about the substance. They focus on
Yeah, yeah.
the reason why you use the
No,
substance.
I mean, sort of before you went to Gabber.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, oh, yeah, I mean, I never I mean, everybody kept saying to me, "Guy, get off the drugs, your life will get better," and I did get off drugs, and my life didn't get better. Like, yeah,
Yeah,
I was struggling off drugs because listen, if you take something away from somebody, ask anybody in the world, "What do you do to cope?" And say, "Okay, now stop." And people are gonna be like, What?" I would love to look at somebody that uses fitness as a coping mechanism
mhm.
and tell them, yeah, yeah, me too, and tell them to stop. No, you can't. I will tell you. Like, I mean, I'll be like doing push-ups in the closet or something. Like, so, we have to look at and understand that until people find an avenue that's better in coping, why would they let go of something that's helped them for so long, even though it's hurting, even at the same time, it's hurting them,
Mhm.
but it's also doing what it's supposed to do. It becomes that fine line of where I said it in the beginning is like the drugs that I'd use to cope were going to turn into the drugs that were going to end my life. And when you get to that road, it's like, oh no, something's going to give here. And for me, that was the easiest thing in looking back was getting off drugs. The hardest thing was learning how to cope without drugs.
Mhm.
That is the biggest challenge that anybody in recovery will face for the rest of their lives.
Yeah. I'd like to say the hardest part of addiction isn't quitting, but living in sobriety.
Yeah,
Now, I
yeah,
remember during COVID when they shut all these gyms down and all these, fitness gurus and fitness people, they made this big stink. You can't close these down for this, this, and this. Now these people lost their gym for what, 2, 3 months, I think. And now imagine what it was like to be a substance user. They brought the same thing, and I'm not saying that it makes it right or anything like that, but that I can hear. I hear what you're saying when it's like you take something away from somebody, and what do? I used to tell my family, like, man, why would you want me to stop something that helps me so much? And it took me a long time to get out of that mindset, right? Because it was pretty ridiculous to think that way, but that's how I thought. I'm like, why would you want me to stop drinking when it's the only thing in the world that makes me feel better?
yeah, yeah,
But unfortunately, it's the wrong thought process. But the
yeah.
quit
Well,
drinking, you'll be fine.
you know what I also, what I also say too is that people always say, does anxiety go away? Does depression go away? Does addiction go away? And on those questions, I'm always, especially when you ask me that, I'm always reflective. I said, listen, my anxiety hasn't gone away, or my depression hasn't gone away, and maybe my addiction hasn't gone away, but I learned how to manage those circumstances a lot better today. And however, I said maybe addiction never goes away. Maybe we just transform into healthier addictions. Like when you have a personality that's driven or enjoys doing things that make you feel good but are not harmful, right? It can still be an addiction to something else, but it's not causing the damage of the 24 relentless, and I think with addiction, it has a couple aspects too. It has the mental aspect, but then also the physical dependency to the substance as well.
Mhm.
And those combination of things, like I have a mental aspect to working out and a physical aspect to working out. Now, I don't try to be how I worked out when I was 20. I just do it because my goal is just to feel good. Like I'm not trying to lose weight, gain weight, do any of that stuff, right? I just want to feel good. And going to the gym every day or, 5 times a week makes me feel good. So I enjoy doing that. But it's a healthy habit. Um and it helps me mentally, physically. And then also to eating right really makes me feel good. And I developed obviously consequences from having what's interesting, I saw this thing where it talks about people with ADHD or and anxiety have major gut problems. And so I have IBS, so I always have to, micromanage what I eat, how I eat, where I eat, what I can eat,
Mhm.
um, but all those things you have to have an understanding and a learning of in order to develop healthier habits. And when you don't have that, like when we're struggling with addiction, we don't have all those learning healthy habits. Those are something that we need people to teach us with. And I don't think we go far enough in the sense of understanding that that can't be taught in 90 days. That takes somebody to mentor us for, years.
Yeah, well, 100%. No, I working out helps me. I like to call it my learn and grow because I like to listen to Audible books, and right now I'm listening to Jordan Tutu's second book. And he talks about his parents too being abusive, and then writing a book about it, and then going back to none of it, and his whole community kind of looking at him, and then finally his friends open up and be like, "Oh, hey, my childhood was like that too." But I noticed ever since I quit uh, substances, my sugar has been like a demon to me. I'm fortunate that I can eat anything really, and I don't my guts. I have an ironclad stomach right now, knock on wood. I don't know how. I'm pretty surprised on the smell I have too, sense of smell. But sugar, man, I've gone almost 10 days now without any junk food, and that's huge for me. I think the longest I went was 30 days,
Damn.
and it's that dopamine hit. But in 5 years, it's the sugar is the thing that I'm trying to conquer right now, and I think I'm up to about 10 days, so I'm gonna keep going on that one because it just drains you, man. There's that the direct correlation between your gut health and your mental health, and 25% of your sugars levels that you put in your body goes to your brain.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Right?
haven't had I haven't had sugar in years. I do well, I shouldn't say that. It depends. I mean, I've had a couple one-offs throughout those years, but I do the all my wife makes all the all natural stuff. So
Oh, cool.
yeah, which is like, I'm eating these things. Like if you go buy a protein bar, it's like garbage. Then you can, it's such a trickery in our marketing schemes. But or if I go to if I get invited and they're to, a fancy, really high end 5-star Michelin star restaurant, and they pull out
The
a
Nanaimo bar?
a Cinnabon or something, that looks like incredible. It's like, wow, I can't pass this up. It's, the dessert's $60, so I'm gonna eat it. It's not a yeah,
That's fair. Yeah. It's
yeah,
fair. Like I realized I gotta take this at the same thing as my drug use, my alcohol use, porn addiction. I have to take the same kind of angle as it just for sugar now, and I gotta treat it more serious because I got kids and I want to be around longer than I should be. The more I can stay here and annoy them, the better.
so you practice harm reduction principles of reducing the harms of something that, you know, you're just trying to reduce. This is what this is how easy and simple it is to translate to people, is that we try to reduce harms and things every day, but yet when it comes to people who use drugs or on the street, we look down upon it, or we attach it to, harm reduction as being, look what it's caused communities with. Harm reduction is different from homelessness and poverty Um, but we lump those things into saying it's harm reduction's fault. Well, no, what's fault is that we haven't for decades addressed the housing crisis, or also given people timely access to detox. And so, or giving people a harm reduction facility to go use substances, or people will say, oh, but they create so much chaos in our communities. Well, the chaos is already there, whether you have it or not. And I don't care what town you're in. If you don't think that if you don't have a supervised consumption site, think again, you do. It's somebody's house that people are using and that are being supervised and watched over. It's interesting because what do we want to do? Do we want to have a solution, or do we want to just continue to push it along and continue to pass this on from generation to generation? Because I will tell you this, that if we don't change and create a full spectrum of care, the drug toxicity level is going to continue to get worse. Organized crime isn't going to put out a safer supply, that's for sure. They're just going to keep rolling out economics. And so if we don't adapt and change to what's happening today in our society, and you can't use the old, recovery treatment narratives from the 80s, 90s, and 2000s in a crisis that we have today, because people don't get room for error anymore when they go into recovery and treatment. You use again, you are at a severe risk of dying. And so we just haven't gotten to a place where we can all agree on one thing that I think we all agree on one thing that no, we don't want to see people die. But we just haven't agreed on the solutions that need to be created in order to make it and understand that this is a time process. It's a process. We can't expect immediate progress. It's going to take people years. And it took me, 31 years of trying in and out to get one stinking year.
Mhm.
And I mean, if you look at every time I used again and had to get brought back to life, and you go through that, and you think, or the health complications that it could have taken my life, if harm reduction wasn't that safety net under me, I wouldn't do what I do today. And educating kids in high schools is probably my most passionate work, and giving kids an understanding that it's okay to not be okay.
Mhm.
Like, and I've said this so many times, the amount of courage that it takes for somebody to reach out and ask for help. That is the humility that we all lack as as humans sometimes, because we're so worried about how people will judge us and think about us. And I just wish that I had that ability and courage to reach out and tell somebody how I really felt about myself. But I just had so much shame that it was so hard to do. Yeah.
The masks that we wear,
Yeah.
how we want to be seen on the outside versus how we feel on the inside. I made that in Kelowna at Bridgeway, and it's this. I tell the kids when I take it to schools, it's like, this is how I wanted to be perceived. This is the outside of my mask. I wanted you to look at me like this: strong, funny, outgoing. I can help you. On the inside, man, I was crying. I was hopeless. I was lonely, but I always wanted to be alone. Right? If I'm alone, you can't hurt me. Only I can hurt me, and I've dealt with me for years. Right?
Yeah.
Is I didn't want
Yeah.
to be hurt by anybody else. But well, hey man, I appreciate everything that you've said here today. Can you just tell people a little bit about Gabor Mate? We learned about him in rehab, and that's the first time I ever heard of him. I'm so impressed that maybe see jealous that you I mean, I wish you weren't in the circumstances you were to meet him, but what kind of guy is he?
He's a very, very kind individual that, he talks about his own struggles with his own addictions. And, I remember asking him that in a podcast that we did. It was like, what made you so kind to me? And he said, like he goes, I could relate, but I mean, I'm a six-figure salary doctor, but I could relate with your struggle because I was struggling myself. And he goes, even though our circumstances are completely different, but I had an understanding of where you were at. And so how could I judge you for that, you know. And kind of when I met him, he was just always such a just a kind guy. You know, he'd always ask me if he could ask a question. He didn't just tell me what I, or he never told me what I needed to do. He asked if I'm open for a suggestion or,
Mhm.
you know, and he did things too to balance his medical practice with a harm reduction practice. And I can remember being in a place where I was going to lose my leg and I had to get antibiotics pumped into my heart every 4 hours for 24 hours for 8 weeks. And
Holy.
yeah, so, and he was more concerned that I would not only lose my leg, but I would die. But he said to me, "What does it take for me to get you to commit to that being here every 4 hours?" I lived at the facility as well, but he just didn't want me to miss any of the antibiotics. And I said, I can't be in withdrawal. Like I can't handle it.
Mhm.
And he's just prescribed a bunch of medications that would keep me comfortable. And, you know, I made it. He did, you know, and I'm sure it was against his the practice of medical. People were shocked that I was getting what I was getting at that
Mhm.
time. And but he balanced knowing that not only am I not going to save this guy's leg, he's going to die. So I'm going to do things to, even though I may not technically be allowed to do it, it's to keep him here, to keep him able to do this. And I have a leg today because of it. And so he was just a guy that just cared a lot about people. And, you know, we're still chat every once in a while. Today I've done a trauma conference with him and we did a podcast together. It's not out yet, but it'll be on YouTube soon. And just you know, a great guy that really wants to make a difference and really taught me a lot. And you know, he showed me I built a prison wall around me. I'm a tough guy, tough exterior. Like, I mean, you see me, you'd be like,
Yeah.
I wanted you to be intimidated, not because I wanted you to be intimidated, but I was trying to protect myself. And this little guy shoots a brick right through my, you know, glass house, and it shatters. And here's this, you know, guy weeping and, you know, shedding tears, you know, breaking down about just how sad my life had truly become, and gave me the ability to understand some things about myself. And then I put the pieces together as well. And you know, so support, but also you have to take credit for the work that you have to do to get there. And I put a hell of a lot of work into it to get where I am today, and I continue to do that, just like you, just like anybody else that's successful in recovery. Is that, I mean, this thing is a constant, consistent work ethic that you have to do. And my addiction never took a day off, and neither does my recovery. And so it's always important to remember. And, you know, for me, I don't judge people if they're using drugs, and I don't support harm reduction over recovery, and I don't support recovery over harm reduction. I support helping people, and I never get lost in that. I don't get lost in the politics. I just want to make a difference in a person's lives. And if that's for me to help them get on safer substances for the time being, then I'll do that. And if that's for me to get them into detox, into treatment, then I'm going to do that. And if that's just for me going to take somebody out for coffee and have a conversation, then I'm just going to do that, because that's, you know, everything I have in my life today is a direct result of helping somebody else. So I never forget that.
Awesome. You know, I really love that, and I can attest to that because when I was living out the Ronald McDonald House, I had a friend. She told me, she's like, she's a pharmacist, online pharmacist. She's like, listen, Justin, you got to check this guy out. And so I checked this guy out, and his name is Guy Felicella. And I messaged him, and I'm like, hey man, I'm in Vancouver. I see what you're doing. I'd love to meet. And he's like, sure, man, let's go for coffee. And he had no idea who I was. Never met me, didn't know me. But he got back to me like right away, and then we ended up meeting and down in East Hastings, and you know, feeding some people. And you know, I learned a lot about homelessness that day. I almost broke down. And But they were so kind, man. They were people. Um they were people looking out for other people too. Can we take some more to hand to somebody else? But 99% of them only took what they needed, that not what they wanted, right? Then that's the difference. That there's that one time where you take what you need, not instead of what you want. And like I'm sure they could have came up and grabbed so much stuff and left, right? But they only took one or two things for themselves because they knew that there was other people there. And you know, they were so polite and so grateful, like for a bowl of cereal. Like I learned a lot that day, and you know, I want to thank you for joining me. today. Thank you for joining me then. People, this is Guy Felicella. You know, reach out to him if you need anything. I'm sure he'll get back to you when he can. He is a busy man. He does speaking engagements. He's an advocate. He's a working man too. He's also a father of three, and because of harm reduction, because of counseling, because of asking for help, he is still with us. And there are three beautiful kids that survive right now. Thanks for everyone to come into the show. Thanks for everyone to stop by to listen to my incredible guest today, Mr. Guy Felicella. Shares amazing story. Please be sure to check him out. Give him a follow on Instagram. Let him reach out. Let him know how he impacted you. I'll put everything down in the show notes here. If you like this podcast episode, please be sure to like it, comment, or share it to your platform and help us spread this message. This is the Stronger You Project. Thank you, everybody, for coming on.